We're introduced to Hannibal Lecter with Silence of the Lambs, 1991, and that movie took over the Academy Awards, put everyone involved on the map. And some time goes by. We have a novel follow-up. Silence of the Lambs is the middle of 3 books. Red Dragon, which has been adapted twice. Silence of the Lambs, and then Hannibal. And Hannibal's the first of these movies where he is front and center. The whole plot, as we like to say, revolves around Hannibal. So the greatest filmmaker of all time, Ridley Scott, he signs on to direct this movie. And then the best of Hollywood come to join him. And we get a banger movie. We really get a film buff movie here. So for the 31 Days of Dread, I want to discuss with you guys a sequel, a prequel, a middle movie. There's a lot to dissect where this movie falls in the Silence of the Lambs franchise. So let's get into it. Hannibal, directed by Ridley Scott. Let's go. It's October, and it's time for the 31 Days of Dread. This is where you get one horror movie a day for the entire month of October. That's how much we love horror. That's how much we love Halloween on the Film Buff Podcast. And here's the crazy thing. This is the longest running horror event in all of podcasting. So get ready. We're going to rock and roll. We're going to scare our socks off. And yes, we're going to be grabbing some candy. Maybe some cereal. Let's go. Hey, welcome back, ghouls and girls. I don't know. I guess men are the ghouls, girls are the girls. Guys, Halloween is approaching. Welcome back to the 31 Days of Dread. If you're new here, every single year, I just get immensely, insanely obsessive about horror movies. And every single year, I try and bring you as much as possible. I go a little bit crazy to preview what we have coming, because I know this episode is going to drop later in the month of October. Immediately after the 31 Days of Dread, we have Thanks Flicking. These are the films you're thankful for. I'm going to do an open call because I want to feature a lot of the films that you're thankful for and maybe have a little bit of a conversation before I sit down and discuss these movies. And then we have Cinemas, the films of Christmas. And no, Die Hard does not qualify, even though the qualification of Die Hard being a non-Christmas movie might be an episode of itself. So guys, we like sequels, don't we? We like good sequels. I like sequels that take a long time. Like a generation of people watch the original, love the original, and then they get a sequel. That's a lot of what we have here with Hannibal, 2001. The original Silence of the Lambs, 1991. This movie's directed by Ridley Scott. We have 2 of the best screenwriters in Hollywood history, David Mamet and Steven Zaillian. For anyone who is particular about these things, well, we'll say anal or a cinephile, but anyone that's historic, like you're historically minded, you would want Silence of the Lambs to get a novel by Tony Harris. You would want him to write the follow-up. So he did. He comes out with the book. Hollywood snatches it up. We get Hans Zimmer on music. Fantastic music. We got John Matheson on cinematography. Amazingly artful. A lot of different environments in this movie. Ridley Scott does something interesting. He puts the camera in like a blurry POV position for a carousel, for some police cars at the end of the movie. He does this one transition where it just looks like you're looking at trees on the road, but you're staring up from the trees from like a passenger seat. Just things the meandering mind is caught doing time and again. Ridley Scott seems very connected to showing us this. We have Florence. We kind of have Maine. You know, we have a little bit of the Washington, D.C. lakeside house environment. And we get Julianne Moore coming in. We can argue who's a better Clarice. Who's a better Clarice? Jodie Foster or Julianne Moore? I love Julianne Moore. She is so much more feisty. She's so much more angry. The character itself has been through the bureaucracy of the FBI, a little bit tougher, a little bit more jaded, and obsessive. This movie reveals some of the cells, let me just say cells, of the relationship of Hannibal Lecter and Clarice. They're in love, they're not in love, right? It's a amazing dance. If we go through the original black and white Universal Studios monster/horror movies, we're often given an image of the monster with a woman, with a helpless woman. And this is a societal trigger. This should trigger you of the horrors of men, the horrors of the world, and the vulnerability of women. Or women are to be protected and women are to be loved. We even see this with King Kong. This whole movie builds into that scenario with Hannibal Lecter. He saves her, and here we go, from man-eating wild boars triggered by the screams of their victims. That's a part of the plot of this movie. We have a Academy Award level performance here from Gary Oldman, who disappears into his makeup. This movie's on all cylinders. This movie was Oscar bait. But we really have this dissection of Hannibal Lecter saving Clarice. He's portrayed almost as Frankenstein's monster or the creature from the Black Lagoon, but he saves her from these wild boars amongst a production that's the best of the best in Hollywood. Ray Liotta is corrupt. He has a movie-defining scene. Spoiler, he eats his own brain. This movie is a slow build to these horrific moments, to the casualness of Hannibal Lecter, to how exact he is, and to how dangerous he is, to how he is not to be trusted, but he is trusted because he's a light and we're drawn to the light. He is charming. He's friendly to children, as we see at the end of this movie. Somewhat of an inspiring person, just him. Now, as a character, right, he's horrifying, but Hannibal Lecter as a person, you're drawn to him. And we kind of have this definition of Hannibal Lecter being one of the all-time on-screen villains. And then we get into the ending. The end of this movie that really upset people. Because Hannibal Lecter mutilates himself. He essentially chops off one of his appendages to escape, but to kind of also save and show his love to Clarice. And a lot of people say, how can he chop off his hand? How can he do it? Now, I'm not familiar with what happens in the book. It kind of makes me want to read the book. Because here I do have a first edition of Red Dragon. That's the first of these books. That's a movie that was made twice. It was made in right after this, actually, in 2002, Red Dragon. But previously, they did what was called Manhunter, directed by Michael Mann. And that, that's a legendary movie performance, all of it itself. And it's very much like Silence of the Lambs, by the way. Silence of the Lambs essentially is a remake. So, this whole franchise is so interesting. And I call it a franchise because the middle of this story is what created the franchise with Silence. But then we make a movie, we go forward, then we make another movie, we go backwards, and then we make a fourth movie that goes backwards to Hannibal Rising, which I'm very curious about, by the way. I will watch that soon. I'm not sure if I'm going to bring it to you. Who am I kidding? Yeah, I'm probably going to bring you that. We'll probably do Hannibal Rising because I'm not familiar with it. And then we get a 5-year long, right, TV series. But anyone that experiences Hannibal Lecter, they will say Hannibal would never cut off his hand to save Clarice. He would never mutilate himself because he enjoys life so much. This is true, and I agree with that. I think everyone who was involved with this movie agrees with that. And that's not what happens. And here we go. Let's talk film buff here. I believe Hannibal Lecter cuts himself enough to release himself from the cuffs that Clarice snuck him into. During a kiss, by the way. Hannibal Lecter does not cut off his hand. That's the only way to save how we even view Silence of the Lambs. We don't see it. It's open for interpretation. And I believe if we feel like we know this character as well as the filmmakers towed the line and taught us about this character, that would never happen. But he's injured at the end of this movie. He's injured on his flight. He went through pain to save her, and then he disappeared into the night. He saved his love for another day. And that's that movie, guys. Hannibal, directed by Ridley Scott. It's one of the great sequels. It's one of the great movies. One of the great horror films. I love The Chase. I love The Cat and Mouse. And here we go. I love the love of this movie. Because I do feel like Hannibal and Clarice, they're in love with one another. And it's a wild love story. It's a wild scenario. But then when we watch movies, we want things to be extraordinary. We want things that we cannot imagine. And this is it. Hannibal, by the greatest filmmaker of all time, Ridley Scott, for the 31 Days of Dread. Rock and roll, guys. AKAPADers, thank you for joining me for another episode of the 31 Days of Dread. We have been dedicated to horror for a long time on this feed, on this podcast. If you guys want to know more about everything we do here, go to akapad.com. From there, you can navigate to the 31 Days of Dread. We have a dedicated landing page that goes through all the years of the 31 Days of Dread, and we also have a directory that jumps you to any movie that we've done. So you can just look up the movie by name, you can go to the directory, it's all alphabetical, and you can just explore. And that's the intent, and that's why we're so into the 31 Days of Dread, because no one's done this. No one has put this much time, this much thought and effort into American horror and international horror, and we love it. Horror is the future of American cinema. Horror right now is holding up American cinema, and I'm so thankful for it. So I'm hoping that you can extend yourself, explore, and continue the conversation. akapad.com. Thanks, guys.